Hey. Gremlins! Hello, everybody. Give me a second. Some technical difficulties. I know we're on the air, but I gotta reload. Here we go. One more second. Okay, reload this page. Okay, there we go. Thank you for being patient with me. Good afternoon. Hello, everybody. Great to be with you on a Tuesday. Who's in the house? Renee in Indiana, Yehuda in South Carolina, Shandora in the Bronx, Melissa in Great Neck, Sharon in New Jersey, Peggy in Colorado, Rachel says shalom, Ryan in Florida, Bella in Florida, Joseph in Massachusetts, Paula in Chicago, Belle in Texas, nursing a cold. May you have a refuah shlema. Bill in mid-Missouri, Jonathan, Bamidbar. Yes, we have begun the book of Bamidbar in our annual cycle of reading the Torah. We are in, close it. We have started that, so we're in the wilderness, as it were. James in Indianapolis, Marjorie in Georgia. Welcome, everybody. Glenn, it was a little slow. Did it get stuck at 50 minutes? No, now it's moving. Okay, it's moving. Glenn and I are preparing for a screening tonight, a rough cut screening of the movie. So very exciting. We'll have a bunch of people in our home screening room that we've set up to check progress on the movie. Let's light up the darkness. All right, new wisdom candle. Here we go. All right, big daf, literally big. Our daf today is page Mem Vav, page 46 here in Tractate Sotah, the 18th volume of the Talmud. These are generally the laws of the suspected adulteress, but if you've been with us for a while, you know we're on an extended digression. Generally speaking, we're talking, we got here because when the temple was standing in Jerusalem up until a couple thousand years ago, and the suspected adulteress was brought to the temple, she would receive a warning from the priest, and take an oath, and it did not have to be spoken in Lashon Kodesh, in the sacred tongue of Hebrew. And so the sages asked, what about other rituals which have to be spoken in Hebrew, which don't? And this brought us to the ritual of the heifer whose neck is broken when there's a victim of a murder in the land of Israel. When the temple is standing really is when this happens. And this murder victim is found lying in a field. The corpse is lying in a field between towns. And so members of the Sanhedrin have to come from Jerusalem and measure which is the nearest town that has elders, meaning that has a rabbinical court of at least 23 judges in it. And then some elders will come from the nearest town, and they have to recite certain words from the Torah that we're going to be talking about today, and that is spoken in Hebrew. That's how we got here. So we're going to pick this up at the bottom of page 45b with Mishna number 3 here in chapter 9, right? Chapter 9. And I say this is a big daf, a big page, because it's literally big. There's a lot of material on this page, so we're gonna keep it moving. Mishnah number 3. The Mishnah continues to describe the ritual of the heifer whose neck is broken. Sharon had asked yesterday, a couple days ago, well, isn't this referred to as an eglah, which means a calf? Isn't it the calf whose neck is broken? And we'll see today why in the Koran they translate eglah as heifer rather than calf. So, after the elders, meaning the judges of the Sanhedrin, who would come out from Jerusalem to measure which is the closest city. So after they've taken the measurement, the elders of Jerusalem took their leave and went away. And the elders of the city that is closest to the corpse bring a heifer from cattle, and a heifer which has not, bring a heifer from the cattle, right? So this young cow, which has not pulled a yoke. But a blemish does not disqualify it, because unlike the description of the red heifer, right? The red heifer was this perfectly red cow, kind of a rust color, but it's pure of that color all over its body. There were 9 red heifers in Jewish history, and they were taken to a spot opposite the Temple Mount. They would be slaughtered and then burned, and then the ashes of the red heifer would be used to make the waters of sprinkling that were used to purify a person from coming into contact with the dead or walking over a grave, etc. And you would have to go through that purification before you could step into the precincts of the temple to bring an offering, for example. So a red heifer was disqualified if it had any kind of a blemish. The heifer whose neck is broken in the case of this victim of an unsolved murder, and the corpse is found out in the countryside, this heifer is not disqualified by a blemish. It is disqualified if it has ever had a yoke, right? So this is not a cow that was ever used to pull a plow. But a blemish does not disqualify it. And they bring the heifer down to a stream that is Aton, this Hebrew word. Aton in this context means, as the word generally indicates, powerful. And the stream must have a forceful flow. I have a good friend, Eitan Katz. He's been on our show a couple times. An incredible singer, Shlomo Katz's brother. They're both incredible singers. So if you ever wonder what the word Aton means, it's strong, forceful, used in this context to describe a stream that has a real current. So the stream must have a forceful flow. And the Mishna comments, even if it is not forceful, it is a valid site for the ritual. And they break the neck of the heifer from behind with a cleaver. And with regard to its place, where the heifer was standing when its neck was broken, this place becomes prohibited for this place to be sown. The ground there is prohibited to be sown or worked, but it is permitted to comb flax there or to cut stones there. You can perform work on that spot, but you can't use that ground for farming. Now, the elders of that city would then wash their hands in the water of the place of the breaking of the neck of the heifer, and that's why you need a stream, and they would recite, quote, "Our hands did not spill this blood, nor did our eyes see." Deuteronomy 21:7. And the Mishna explains, but did it enter our minds that the elders of the court of this nearby city are spillers of blood? That they must make such a declaration, right? You brought the judges from a nearby city to the site where this corpse was found. Are you saying that they're under suspicion that they might have committed the murder? That they have to declare that they have not committed the murder? That their hands are innocent from spilling the blood? Why would we think that? Rather, they mean, when they make this statement, they mean to declare that the victim did not come to us, and then we let him take his leave without food. And we did not see him and then leave him alone to depart without accompaniment. They therefore attest that they took care of all his needs and are not responsible for his death, even indirectly. When you think about what an amazing teaching is embedded here, right? This idea, when we think about, we live in a time when so many people are so isolated. And because they're so isolated, they end up having, true, terrible mental health issues. This idea that a community is responsible for the people in it, so that these elders declare, we didn't send him on his way alone and unaccompanied, and that's why he became the victim to a crime. And the priests recite, quote, "Forgive, Lord, your people Israel, whom you have redeemed, and suffer not innocent blood to remain in the midst of your people Israel." Deuteronomy 21:8. They did not have to recite the conclusion of the verse, "and the blood shall be forgiven for them," as this is not part of the priest's statement, but rather the divine spirit informs them, "When you shall do so, the blood is forgiven for you." Right? So until these elders make this declaration, it's like the status quo is that this unsolved murder, everyone is responsible. All of us are responsible that this happened. Let's continue. That's the Mishnah. Now we're on 46a. Here's the Gemara on this Mishnah number 3. So with regard to the Mishnah's statement that the heifer is not disqualified by a blemish, the Gemara suggests, and a blemish should disqualify in the case of the heifer by means of a kal v'chomer inference, a fortiori inference. And if, in the case of the red heifer, which is not disqualified by years, as it may be of any age, and yet a blemish disqualifies it, then a heifer for this ritual, which is disqualified by years, as it is valid only until it is 2 years of age, is it not logical that a blemish should disqualify it? Right? If we're going to be more stringent with the heifer whose neck is broken than the heifer that is the red heifer, in that the red heifer can be older, this heifer can only be up to 2 years of age, then aren't we going to say, since this has a greater stringency about it and that greater age than 2 years disqualifies it, that then all the stringencies of the red heifer should apply to this heifer also? Why are we assuming that a blemish doesn't disqualify this heifer, even though a blemish wasn't mentioned by the Torah? And the Gemara answers, no, you can't make this inference. It is different there in the case of the red heifer. As the verse states, wherein has no blemish, Numbers 19:2. So this serves as an exclusion and teaches that it is only with regard to it, that a blemish is disqualifying, but a blemish is not disqualifying with regard to the heifer of the ritual of the breaking of the neck. So the Gemara asks, however, if that is so, in other words, we're not going to apply the stringency, we know that the red heifer has to be red. That stringency certainly doesn't apply to the heifer whose neck is broken. So just because this one has a stringency in that it can only be up to 2 years of age and that one doesn't, we're not going to apply, every stringency. In other words, they have different requirements. That's what they're saying. These heifers have different requirements. So the Gemara asks, well, however, if that is so, if the word ba precludes a derivation by a kal v'chomer inference, then any other labor performed with the red heifer, apart from pulling a yoke, should not disqualify it. While the verse disqualifies a red heifer only if it pulled a yoke, as it states, and upon which it never came a yoke, Numbers 19:2, so then a similar kal v'chomer inference should be learned from the heifer whose neck is to be broken to disqualify a red heifer that has performed any labor. However, since the verse states with regard to the heifer whose neck is to be broken, that has not been worked with, from Deuteronomy 21:3, so this indicates that labor is disqualifying only for the heifer whose neck is to be broken, but not for a red heifer. So interesting, if the heifer whose neck is to be broken has ever been used to do work, it's disqualified. The red heifer will only be disqualified if it ever had a yoke on its neck. But if it somehow did work without use of a yoke, that would not disqualify it. Whereas the heifer whose neck is to be broken, even if it wasn't worked, but it had a yoke on it, or if it was worked, right, that's going to disqualify it. Now, why then does Rav Yehuda say that Rav says, if he placed a bundle of sacks on a red heifer, the heifer is immediately disqualified from being used as a red heifer? Didn't you just say that with the red heifer, it's only disqualified if you put a yoke on its neck, but it could have been worked in some way? So now why is Rav Yehuda say, well, if you worked it by having it carry some sacks, that would disqualify it as a red heifer? And as for the heifer whose neck is to be broken, it is not disqualified by such labor until it pulls and moves the burden, right? If you just put sacks on its back, it hasn't actually worked. It only works when it moves the sacks or if it puts the yoke on its neck. So why does the bearing of weight of the bundle disqualify the red heifer, but not the heifer whose neck is to be broken? And the Gemara explains the law with regard to the red heifer is different. As we learn by a verbal analogy between the word yoke, used with regard to the red heifer, and the word yoke, used with regard to the heifer whose neck is broken, that only labor disqualifies the red heifer. Now, the Gemara raises an objection. If there is a verbal analogy between the red heifer and the heifer that will have its neck broken, then the law that a blemish should disqualify the heifer whose neck is to be broken should also be derived from the usage of the word yoke. with regard to the heifer whose neck is broken, and from the usage of yoke with regard to the red heifer. Since yoke is used in both contexts, maybe we should be applying the laws from one to the other. And the Gemara answers, the merciful one has excluded this possibility of making that analogy by placing in the verse the word ba, which indicates that disqualification due to blemish applies only to the red heifer and not the heifer whose neck is broken. Now, right, if a blemish is found in the red heifer, disqualified, meaning the blemish is found in it, right? Not red if the blemish is found in our heifer here. So the Gemara counters this claim. Maybe this argument doesn't work. In the verse concerning the heifer whose neck is broken, the Torah also writes the word ba. So therefore, it should be the case that forms of labor other than pulling a yoke are disqualifying only with regard to it and not with regard to the red heifer. So the Gemara answers that word, ba, is required by Rav Yehuda in order to exclude sacred offerings, i.e., which are not disqualified by labor. Right? If you're going to bring a sin offering and you're going to bring a goat or a sheep for a sin offering in the temple, it can have a blemish, but if it ever did farm work for you, that would not disqualify it. Right? So this disqualification, because it ever did labor, applies to the heifers, but not to sacrificial offerings. Right? The word ba is required by Rabbi Yehuda to exclude sacred offerings, which are not disqualified by labor. And one may bring an animal that has been used for labor as an offering when the temple is standing. So it might enter your mind to say that this should be derived by a kal v'chomer inference from a heifer whose neck is broken, as follows. And if, with regard to a heifer whose neck is broken, which is not disqualified by a blemish, labor nevertheless disqualifies it, then with regard to sacred offerings, which are disqualified by a blemish, is it not right that labor should also disqualify them? In order to counter this argument, the word ba, it, right, in it, teaches us that a sacred offering is not disqualified by labor. Now, with regard to this suggested kal v'chomer inference, the Gemara observes that it can be refuted in a different way. What about the fact that a heifer whose neck is broken is disqualified by years, meaning that if it's more than 2 years of age, it's disqualified? As it is clear that the heifer whose neck is to be broken carries some restrictions that do not apply to sacred offerings, which can be older than 2. Perhaps being disqualified by labor is another such restriction. So the Gemara refutes this argument. Is that to say that there are no sacred offerings that are disqualified by years? There are several offerings that may be brought only in their first or second year, and where the verse is necessary to teach that sacred offerings are not disqualified by labor, it is with regard to those sacred offerings that are disqualified by reaching a certain age. Now the Gemara raises an objection, but is the law that sacred offerings are not disqualified by labor derived from this verse? No, we derive it from elsewhere. The verse states with regard to sacred offerings, right? A guilt offering, a sin offering, a peace offering. Blind or broken or maimed or having a wart or scabbed or scurvy, you shall not offer these to the Lord. This verse serves to create an exclusion, teaching that it is these that you may not sacrifice, but you may sacrifice sacred animals that have been used for labor. And the Gemara answers, it was necessary to state the law twice. It might enter your mind to say that this law, that one may sacrifice animals that have been used for labor, applies only in a case where they were used for permitted labor. But if they were used for prohibited labor, for example, if they were used for labor on Shabbos, you might say that it is prohibited to bring them as an offering. In order to refute that argument, it is necessary to state the law again. So we're getting a little bit into the weeds, right, on the difference between the heifer whose neck is broken, the red heifer that was used to create the waters of sprinkling for purification, and sacred offerings that were brought in the temple. These are, in all three cases, right, an animal loses its life, but its purpose is very different, and the rules and qualifications and disqualifications are different, as we're seeing. Now, the Gemara poses another question. But this law, that prohibited labor does not disqualify sacred offerings, is also derived from here, a verse with regard to the sacrifice of blemished animals, where it says in Leviticus 22:25, and from the hand of a stranger you shall not offer the bread of your God from any of these, because there is a blemish in them. Now this verse emphasizes that it is only these, i.e. blemished animals, that you may not sacrifice. But you may sacrifice animals that have been used for labor. Now, since this verse is discussing the possibility of accepting offerings from a Gentile who presumably also performed prohibited labor with the animal, right? If the animal was used for labor at all, why should we assume that a Gentile who has no obligation to refrain from work on Shabbos didn't work the animal on Shabbos? If the animal was used for labor, it probably was used on Shabbos. We can't guarantee that it wasn't, because the Gentile has no obligation not to work on Shabbos. So why do we have this restriction stated in this manner? This demonstrates that prohibited labor does not disqualify animals from being sacrificed as offerings. Now, the Gemara answers, it was necessary to teach this law a third time. Right, the Torah teaches 3 times that a blemished animal may not be offered, or that an animal that it is not a disqualification to an offering, that the animal is used for labor. It was necessary to teach this law a third time. Why? It might enter your mind to say this law, that labor does not disqualify offerings, applies only where one performed labor with them when they were non-sacred, meaning before they were consecrated. And afterward, the person dedicated them as an offering. And from then on, it could not be used for any kind of labor. But if one performed labor with them when they were already sacred animals, you might say that it is prohibited to bring them as offerings. In order to refute this argument, it is necessary to teach this law in 3 separate places. That's very interesting. I mean, this would be a digression of the digression of the digression. But this idea that when you consecrate an animal to bring it as an offering, for sure it's prohibited to work that animal, because you don't own it anymore. Now it belongs to God, as it were. But if you did perform work with it, so you made a transgression, you might have to bring a sin offering for that transgression, or some other punishment, some other kind of atonement, but you didn't disqualify that animal from being brought as an offering. Now, the Gemara returns to discuss the matter itself. Rav Yehuda says that Rav said, we're back to the heifer whose neck is broken and the red heifer comparison. If one placed a bundle of sacks on a red heifer, it is disqualified, right? Even if it didn't pull or move the sacks, and even though we said that some kind of labor doesn't disqualify the red heifer, but now you're saying, at least one sage said, that if you just rest some sacks, a bundle, on top of the red heifer, you've disqualified the red heifer from being used, to create the water purification. And as for a heifer whose neck is broken, it is not disqualified until it pulls a burden. So the Gemara objects, based on a Baraisa. It states, with regard to the red heifer, that upon which never came a yoke. Numbers 19:2. So I have derived only a yoke. From where do I derive that other types of labor also disqualify the animal? So you can say the following Kal v'chomer inference. If, with regard to a heifer whose neck is broken, which is not disqualified by a blemish, other types of labor disqualify it, then with regard to the red heifer, which is disqualified by a blemish, is it not right that other types of labor should disqualify it? Right? If this case is more stringent than that, and this is disqualified by such and such a thing, then certainly that, which is generally more stringent than this, would be disqualified by anything which disqualifies this one. That's the Kal v'chomer inference. And of course, the Gemara is going to refute that, because they're different rituals with different qualifications and disqualifications. And if it is your wish to say that this Kal v'chomer inference is unsound, you can learn this law through a different form of reasoning, the verbal analogy. It is stated here with regard to the red heifer, yoke. And it is stated there with regard to the heifer whose neck is broken, yoke. Just as there other types of labor disqualify it, so too here in the case of the red heifer, other types of labor disqualify it. So the Gemara asks, what is the meaning of if it is your wish to say? What potential problem with the Kal V'chomer inference necessitates using the verbal analogy? Gemara explains, and perhaps you would say that the Kal V'chomer can be refuted like this. What is unique about a heifer whose neck is broken? That it is disqualified by... what is unique about a heifer whose neck is broken is that it is disqualified by years, which is not the case of the red heifer. That's how we break the Kal V'chomer and say they have different requirements. Alternatively, one could suggest that sacred offerings will prove that this inference should not be made, as a blemish is disqualifying with regard to sacred offerings, but labor is not disqualifying with regard to them. As the Kal V'chomer inference can be refuted in either of these two ways, there is a need for the verbal analogy. Okay, it is stated here, yoke, and it is stated there, yoke. So we could connect the two sets of laws by the use of the word yoke in both cases. So just as there in the case of the heifer whose neck is broken, other types of labor disqualify it, so too other types of labor disqualify the red heifer. But the Gemara objects to this verbal analogy. And from the place that you came, you can offer an alternative exposition. Just as below, in the case of the heifer whose neck is broken, it is not disqualified by carrying a burden until it pulls the yoke. So too here, a red heifer should not be disqualified until it pulls the yoke. And this would refute the statement of Rav. So the Gemara answers to the objection to this statement of Rav from a Baraisa. It is a dispute among the Tanaim, the rabbis of the Mishnah, as there are those who cite the source of this law, that labor disqualifies the red heifer, by verbal analogy from a heifer whose neck is broken, and therefore the red heifer is disqualified only if it pulls the burden. And there are those who cite the source of this law from the red heifer itself, and consequently they disqualify the red heifer even if it did not pull the yoke. And this is as it is taught in a Baraisa with regard to a red heifer from the term yoke. I have derived only that a yoke disqualifies a red heifer. From where do I derive other types of labor? And the verse states that upon which never came a yoke. The verse could be read with a pause after the word came, which would teach that it is disqualified in any case, no matter what labor was performed with it. If so, what is the meaning when the verse states yoke? If all forms of if any form of labor disqualifies it, what difference does it make whether a yoke was there or not? Why is the word yoke there? It teaches us that a yoke placed on the animal disqualifies it, whether the yoke was on the animal at the time of performing labor or whether it was not on the animal at the time of performing labor. In other words, if you put the yoke on the heifer in order to pull the wagon, and then somebody came along, no, that's a red heifer, you can't use it for work. And so they take the yoke off, but the yoke was on the animal. That would be enough to disqualify it. However, other types of labor actions disqualify animals only at the time of actually performing the labor. So Rav ruled in accordance with that opinion. Now, the Gemara objects, and perhaps one can say a different exposition of the verse, that upon which never came, is a generalization that disqualifies the animal after any type of labor, while yoke is a detail. Now we're using yet another form of legal interpretation. We've talked about the Kal V'chomer, going from a stringent case to a less stringent case, and whether we apply stringencies or not. The verbal analogy, connecting two sets of laws because a common word appears in both places in the Torah. And now we're going to use the system of generalization followed by a detail. There is a generalization and a detail. And the principle of legal exposition of the Torah, in that case, is there is nothing in the generalization other than what is specified in the detail. Therefore, with regard to a yoke, yes, it will disqualify an animal from being used as a red heifer, but with regard to anything else, no, it will not disqualify the animal. And the Gemara answers, the phrase, that upon which never came, this is an amplification. And the addition of this term results in this verse not belonging to the category of generalizations and details, but rather to a different legal process that includes amplification. So the Gemara comments, and a case like this is also taught in a Baraisa with regard to a heifer whose neck is broken from the word yoke. I have derived only that a yoke disqualifies. From where do I derive the other types of labor? The same verse states that has not been worked with. And this teaches that it is disqualified in any case, no matter what labor was performed with it. So if so, what is the meaning of the verse that includes the word yoke? It serves to teach us that a yoke placed on an animal disqualifies it, whether the yoke was on the animal at the time of performing labor or whether it was on the animal not at the time of performing labor, i.e. it was merely placed on the animal, whereas other types of labor disqualify animals only when they're actually doing labor. Now, the Gemara objects, and perhaps one can say a different exposition of the verse that has not been worked with, say that this is a generalization that disqualifies the animal after any type of labor, and yoke is a detail. So we have a generalization and a detail. And the principle of this kind of exposition is that there's nothing in the generalization other than what is in the detail. So if we apply that here, with regard to a yoke, yes, it will disqualify an animal. But with regard to anything else, no, it will not disqualify it. In other words, if you put a saddle on the heifer, but you didn't actually get on the saddle and ride with it, does the saddle disqualify it because it was potentially used to, would have been to make the animal carry a person, but it never actually carried the person? So does putting the saddle on the heifer disqualify it in the same way that a yoke would disqualify it? The answer here would be no. But the Gemara answers the phrase that has not been worked with is an amplification, and the addition of this term results in the verse not belonging to the category of generalizations and details. So we're back to that. Rabbi Bahu said, I asked of Rabbi Yochanan, this pulling of a yoke that disqualifies the heifer whose neck is broken, with how much, i.e., how far must the animal pull the yoke for it to be disqualified? He said to me, like the measure of the size of a full yoke. And a dilemma was raised before the sages. Does this mean according to its length or according to its width? And one of the sages, and Rabbi Yaakov was his name, said to them, it was explained to me personally by Rabbi Yochanan himself, the pulling of a yoke is according to its width, which is a handbreadth. So the Gemara poses a question. And since he stated a fixed measurement, let him merely state a handbreadth. Why was it necessary to add the width of a yoke? And the Gemara answers, this teaches us the measure of a yoke along its width is a handbreadth. What difference is there in knowing this fact? This teaches that in the case of a commercial transaction, a buyer may retract his purchase if the yoke he was given is less than a handbreadth wide. Right? They're teaching us what constitutes a proper yoke. Now, Rabbi Yochanan ben Shaul says, for what reason did the Torah say to bring a heifer whose neck is broken to a stream? Okay, finally, we got away from the definition of disqualifying the heifer whose neck is to be broken by putting a yoke on it or working it or a blemish, right? That we were just saying what heifer constitutes a heifer. And we spent a lot of time deriving that law. Right? And now we're moving back to the ritual itself, and they're asking a different question. Okay, we've got a heifer. It's a qualified heifer. It's less than 2 years old. It wasn't worked. If it's blemished, that doesn't matter. Now, why does the ritual require that we bring this heifer to a stream? Right? This body, the corpse, that was found between two cities lying in a field, as we talked about yesterday, let's say it's not near a stream. So you would think that you would bring the heifer whose neck is to be broken to the corpse. Why are you now going to transport this heifer, to, I guess, the stream that is nearest to where the corpse was lying? Why? For what reason did the Torah say to bring a heifer whose neck is to be broken to a stream? So the Holy One, blessed be He, said, let something, right there, now they're putting words in God's mouth, as it were, to help us understand why the Torah requires this. So it must be that the Holy One, blessed be He, said, let something that did not produce fruit, meaning a heifer that has not given birth, come and have its neck be broken at a stream that flows forcefully, which is a place that does not produce fruit. A stream doesn't produce fruit. and atone for the murder of one who was not given an opportunity to produce fruit. The one who was murdered can no longer have children. Is that what's being said? The Gemara asks, what is this fruit that he was not given an opportunity to produce, the murder victim? If we say this refers to being fruitful and multiplying, i.e., that the killer prevented the victim from having more children, but if that is so, in the case of an elderly person or a eunuch, right, somebody who is not capable of having children, so too will you say that we do not bring the heifer's neck, that we do not break the heifer's neck because that victim could not have had any more children even if they had lived? Rather, the answer is no, right? So if the murder victim was somebody who couldn't have children anyway, we still break the heifer's neck. We still perform this ritual. So it's not that the God's motivation for creating this ritual and bringing it to a stream had something to do with the fact that the victim will no longer be fruitful in terms of having children. Rather, the fruit in this sort of analogy, right, in this imagined motivation of God, the fruit are not his or her potential children, but rather mitzvahs. The killer deprived the victim of the opportunity to perform additional mitzvahs. And this, my friends, by the way, is the reason why it is incumbent on all of us to take care of our health. Because if we're sloppy with our health and we end up shortening our lives by not taking care of the bodies that we've been given by God, and so we die younger than we would have died otherwise, well, then we're depriving ourselves of all those mitzvahs and their merit that we could have performed had we lived longer. Now, the Mishna taught, and they bring the heifer, down to a stream that is etan. So etan, in this context, means, as the word generally indicates, forceful. So the sages taught, from where is it derived that etan means forceful? It is, as it is stated, now on 46b, firm is your dwelling place. Etan is your dwelling place, and your nest is set in the rock. Numbers 24:21. And it states in Micah 6:2, hear, O you mountains, the Lord's controversy, and the enduring rocks, etanim, the foundations of the earth. So the use of the word in this verse indicates that etan means something hard, like a rock or a mountain. Others say a different explanation of the word etan. From where is it derived? That etan means not firm, but old. Old, as it is stated in Jeremiah 5:15, it is an ancient nation. Etan, right? Am etan, an ancient nation, a nation from of old. Now the Mishnah taught, and they break the neck. So they've accepted that the stream, that etan in this context means forceful. So we're moving on. The Mishnah taught, and they break the neck, orphan, the neck of the heifer, from behind with a cleaver. And the Gemara explains, what is the reason that the sages understood that the heifer is killed in this manner? Now, this is how you understand, by the way, that this ritual is not a sacrifice. The animal loses its life, but it's not a korban. It's not a sacrifice like when we bring offerings in the temple. Because when offerings are brought in the temple, when they are sacrificed, they are shechted, right? They're slaughtered in the same way we would slaughter a cow or a goat or a sheep to eat it. It has to be shechted, right, by a shochet, where a very sharp blade is quickly brought across the neck, and it severs both the esophagus and the trachea, right? But this heifer whose neck is broken, it's not that a knife severs those pipes, but rather that a cleaver breaks the neck from behind, right? It's a very different method of killing the animal. So that's the way it's done. And the Gemara explains what is the reason that the sages understood that the heifer is killed in this manner. And they derive the term arifa, which is similar to orphan, neck, or fin, the term arifa, which describes what is done to the heifer, that this refers to breaking the back of the neck. And we learn that from the term arifa, which is stated with regard to the bird brought as a sin offering, right? The bird is not slaughtered. This is when you're talking about doves that are brought as offerings in the temple, and they are killed with a process called malika, where the priest pinches its neck. It's not that a knife slices it, because nobody eats the dove. That is a different kind of offering. So the Mishnah taught further, and with regard to its place, right? We learned in the Mishnah that where the ground on which the heifer had its neck broken, that can never become farmland that's going to be used to grow crops. And with regard to its place, it is prohibited for that ground to be sown or to be worked. And the sages taught the verse, which may neither be worked nor sown, this is referring to the past. That is, a place which had not previously been worked or sown. This is the statement of Rabbi Yoshia. Rabbi Yonasan says, no, it speaks of the future, meaning that it is prohibited to sow or work the land from that point onward. Rava said, as for the future, meaning that the land cannot be used in the future for farming, everyone agrees that it is prohibited to sow or work the land. As it is written, neither worked nor sown in the future tense. When they disagree, it is with regard to the past. Rabbi Yoshia, who disqualifies a place that was sown beforehand, holds, does it state, and it shall not be worked in the form of a future command? And Rabbi Yonasan responds, does it state, and was not worked in the past tense? And Rabbi Yoshia answers, the term which indicates the past. And as for Rabbi Yonasan, in his opinion, the term which is a term of amplification, as will be explained later in the Gemara, and it is not referring to the past, right? So they're looking very precisely at the language, and they all agree that from then on, that land cannot be farmed. What they disagree on is whether it's okay to use a spot that had been farmed in the past. Now, the Mishnah taught, but it is permitted to comb flax there or to cut stones there. You can do work on top of that piece of land. You just can't work the land itself. So the sages taught from the phrase, quote, which may neither be worked nor sown, I have derived only sowing, planting seeds. From where do I derive that other types of labor are also prohibited? And the verse states, which may be neither worked nor sown, indicating that it may not be worked in any manner. I guess, for example, you couldn't sift through that dirt looking for gold. But you could just do work on top of it, like you could do some carpentry work on top of that land. And the Baraisa continues, so if so, why does the verse also need to state, nor sown? It is in order to say to you that just as sowing is unique, S-O-W-I-N-G, is unique in that it is labor performed on the land itself, so too all labor that is performed on the land itself, that's prohibited. And this excludes combing flax or cutting stones on top of that land, which are not done to the land itself. But the Gemara objects. And perhaps one can say a different exposition. Maybe the phrase, which may be neither worked, is a generalization. And the phrase, nor sown, is a detail. And when the Torah writes a generalization and a detail, there's nothing in the generalization other than what is in the detail. I.e., the detail serves to impose a limit on the generalization. So consequently, the verse is teaching that with regard to sowing, yes, it is prohibited, but with regard to anything else, no, it is not prohibited. And the Gemara again answers the term which, W-H-I-C-H, this is an amplification, and the addition of this term results in this verse not belonging to the category of generalizations and details, so we don't learn using that method. Now, our Mishnah, back to the ritual of the heifer whose neck is broken, taught that the elders of the city would then wash their hands. And the sages taught, with regard to the verse, quote, and all the elders of that city who are nearest to the slain man shall wash their hands over the heifer whose neck was broken in the valley. One might have thought that there was no need for the verse to state whose neck was broken, because we're already talking about the heifer whose neck is broken. Why are we repeating that this is the heifer whose neck is broken? We already established that's the heifer we're talking about. So what is the meaning when the verse adds whose neck was broken, right? It seems redundant, but why does the Torah include this phrase again? So it serves to teach us that they wash their hands over the place where the heifer's neck was broken. How are you going to wash your hands if there's not a stream? You could have brought water in a basin, but no, you bring the heifer to the stream. Now, the verse further states, and they shall say, our hands did not spill this blood, nor did our eyes see. Okay. We've been a very technical area, how they derive these laws. Now we're getting to a more spiritual place of teaching from this daf. And they shall say, our hands did not spill this blood, nor did our eyes see. So the Mishnah explains, but did it enter our minds that the elders of the court are spillers of blood, that they must make such a declaration? Rather, they mean to declare the victim did not come to us, and then we let him take his leave without food, and we did not see him and then leave him alone to depart without accompaniment. They therefore attest that they took care of all his needs and are not responsible for his death, even indirectly. Now, it's very likely that these elders of the city who come and find, this murder victim, maybe they know him, maybe they don't. The only qualification of bringing these particular elders is that they are the elders of the city that was nearest to the spot where the body was found. So how do they know that they, as a city, did not let this person leave the city without feeding and without accompaniment, right? But yet they need to attest that. Now, it is taught in a baraisa. Rabbi Meir would say, there is coercion with regard to accompaniment, i.e., one who does not want to accompany another is nevertheless required to do so, as the reward for accompaniment is without measure. And the proof of the importance of accompaniment is from a verse, as it is stated with regard to when the Jewish people laid siege to the city of Bethel, and this is in the book of Judges 124, and there was a war, right? And the children of Israel were involved in this war. And it says, quote, and the watchers saw a man come out of the city, and they said to him, show us please the entrance into the city, and we will deal kindly with you. And it is written, he showed them the entrance to the city. And what kindness did they perform with him? It is that they killed the entire city by the sword, but that man and his family they sent free. Now the Gemara elaborates on the reward received in that story. And the next verse states, and the man went to the land of the Hittites, and he built a city, and he called its name Luz, L-U-Z. And that is its name to this day. And it is taught in Baraisa, this is the city Luz, where sky blue wool, techelis, is dyed. The techelis that we use in our tzitzis, the blue thread in our ritual fringes. It is the same city Luz where, although Sennacherib came and exiled many nations from place to place, he did not disarrange and exile its inhabitants. And Nebuchadnezzar, when he came and conquered many lands and destroyed the first temple, he did not destroy the city of Luz. And even the angel of death has no permission to pass through it. Rather, its elders, when they have decided that they have reached the end of life, go outside the city wall and die. We're a little lost, right? What happened? So there was this person of the city. Really, what did he do? He showed these scouts from the army where the entrance to the city is. What does that have to do with accompanying a traveler? Well, he accompanied these scouts to the place that they needed to go. He also showed them where they were going, right? And the merit for showing them where they were going was so great that his life was spared when his whole city was destroyed, that he went and founded a city himself, that city was spared destruction in numerous wars in centuries later, was not destroyed when Nebuchadnezzar wrought havoc on the land of Israel. And that city remained a place of so much blessing that people didn't even die of old age in the city, but rather, when it was time for them to die, they would go out of the city and their old age could overcome them and they would die. So great is the reward for accompanying a traveler. And this is, and the way we got here is to say that these elders of the city are saying, well, we run a city where we would not let travelers leave the city, unfed and unaccompanied, because that is a legal requirement on us as Jews, and we all live a righteous life as Jews. That's how strong this mitzvah is. We've talked about this on at other times, and it's one really worth remembering. Somebody comes and stays at your house. They leave your house. You have to make sure that they know where they're going. Now, in modern times, maybe it's not as dangerous as in ancient days, when to leave a city, a walled city, that was a safe place. And now you're going to be out on the highway, out on the road, between protected cities, where the brigands and robbers and highwaymen could prey on you, and to let somebody go alone into that truly is allowing them to come in danger of their life. And that's why you have to make sure that you send a party with them to help them get to where they're going. And then you don't go one person, because then that person is going to come back alone, right? So you go two with them, accompany him, and then come back. In modern times, the minimum way to satisfy this requirement is that you walk somebody to the end of your driveway and you make sure that you have confirmed with them that they know where they're going, they have directions, they have transportation arranged, etc. If they're just kind of going out, not sure where they're going, and you let them go, you are guilty of violating a mitzvah, a commandment. And these matters are not inferred through a kal v'chomer. And if this Canaanite, who did not speak with his mouth and explicitly tell them where the city entrance was and did not walk with them by foot, but merely indicated the correct path to them, nevertheless caused himself to be rescued and also had the merit to provide rescue for his descendants until the end of all generations in that city of Luz, then with regard to one who accompanies another by foot, all the more so will his reward be great. Are these matters not inferred by kal v'chomer, right? This person just showed them where to go by pointing and got all this merit for himself. How much more do you accrue merit for yourself and your family and your descendants if you accompany a traveler by foot? So after stating that man did not openly guide those watching the city, the Gemara asks, well, how did the Canaanite show them the entrance to the city? So Chizkiah says he twisted his mouth for them. In other words, he showed them the path to the city by moving his lips. And Rabbi Yochanan says he showed them with his finger alone. And it is taught in a Baraisa in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Yochanan, because this Canaanite showed them with his finger, he caused himself to be rescued and merited rescue for his descendants as well until the end of all generations. So Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi says, one who walks along the way without having someone to accompany him should occupy himself with words of Torah, right? If you don't have the good fortune to have someone to walk with you, in a place that might be dangerous, then what do you do? Okay, you can protect yourself by saying words of Torah as you go. As it is stated with regard to words of Torah, Proverbs 1:9, for they shall be a chaplet of grace to your head and chains around your neck. And Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi further says, due to 4 steps that Pharaoh accompanied Abraham. Remember when Abraham went down into Egypt and passed off his wife Sarah as his sister, and there was a whole episode where she was taken into Pharaoh's palace, but brought plague to Pharaoh's palace, and then they finally realized that no, she's not his sister, she's his wife. And then Pharaoh said, why did you tell us she's your sister? Take her and go, and here's a bunch of gifts and wealth, and just be on your way. And when he went on his way, right, Pharaoh at least accompanied him. And for that, Pharaoh was rewarded. How? Due to the 4 steps that Pharaoh accompanied Abraham, as it is stated, and Pharaoh gave men charge concerning him, and they brought him on the way, and his wife, and all that he had. They accompanied him out of Egypt. So Pharaoh enslaved Abraham's descendants for 400 years. What? How is this this is the reward that Pharaoh received for helping Abraham? That Abraham's descendants were enslaved for 400 years? Yes. The idea is not that these 4 steps caused Abraham's descendants to be enslaved, as Abraham was not liable to punishment for being accompanied. Abraham didn't do anything wrong that he was accompanied. The decree of slavery was said to Abraham in a different incident at the covenant between the pieces, because he questioned God with regard to inheriting the land of Israel. And it was not said then which nation would enslave Abraham's descendants, right? God said to Abraham, know of a certainty that your descendants will be enslaved for 400 years, and then they will come out and prosper. And the nation for that enslavement hadn't been picked yet. So why did Pharaoh merit that his nation would be the one to, exploit the Jews for 400 years? Because he accompanied Abraham in this way. Pharaoh enslaved Abraham's descendants for 400 years, as it is stated, and shall serve them, and they shall afflict them 400 years. And Rav Yehuda says that Rav said, anyone who accompanies his friend 4 cubits in a city will come to no harm by accompanying him. And the Gemara relates, Ravina accompanied Rava bar Yitzchak 4 cubits in a city, and he came close to harm, but he was saved. I'm getting close to the end, so if you've got questions or comments, get them in. It's a very long daf, but a very rich one. And the sages taught, a teacher accompanies a student until the outskirts of the city. A friend accompanies a friend until the Shabbos boundary of that city, 2,000 cubits beyond the city. And for a student who accompanies his teacher, there is no measure to the distance he accompanies him. Right? A teacher only has to accompany a student, a short way. A friend accompanies his friend longer. But if you're going to accompany your teacher who's going to his destination, you accompany your teacher as far as he's going, right? Because you honor your teacher in this way. And the Gemara asks, well, how far is that? And the student is certainly not required to walk with him the entire way, right? So your teacher is giving a lecture in your city, and then he's going to go to another city. Do you have to accompany your teacher to the next city that he's going to so that he's accompanied? Do you have to go that far? And Rav Sheshes says up to a parasang. So what's a parasang? A parasang is equal to 4 mil, and this equals, according to one opinion, about 3.86 kilometers, and according to another opinion, about 4.63 kilometers, right? So call it an average of about, like a mil is about a kilometer, and a parsang is about 4 kilometers, right? So the Gemara comments, and we said this amount only with regard to one who is not his most significant teacher, but he accompanies his most significant teacher who taught him most of his knowledge, 3 parasangs, like 12 kilometers. So the Gemara relates a story about accompaniment. Rav Kahana accompanied Rav Shimi bar Ashi from the town of Pum-Nahara to the palm grove in Babylonia. When they arrived there, Rav Kahana said to Rav Shimi bar Ashi, is it true that you say that these palm trees of Babylonia have been in this place since the years of Adam the first man? And Rav Shimi bar Ashi said to him, by mentioning Adam, the first man, you reminded me of something that Rabbi Yosef, the son of Rabbi Hanina, says. What is the meaning of that which is written, through a land that no man passed through and where no person, Adam, dwelt, in Jeremiah 2:6. And this verse is difficult. Since it is a land through which no man has passed, where would he dwell? And if he did not dwell, where did he pass? Why does the verse add that no person has dwelled there? Rather, this is the meaning, any land concerning which Adam, the first man, decreed that it would be a settled area. It eventually became settled. But a land concerning which Adam, the first man, did not decree that it should be settled, it was not settled. And the Gemara also relates that Rav Mordechai accompanied Rav Ashi from the town of Hagronia until Bei Kefe, and some say that he accompanied him until Bei Dura. We're going to just stop there, even though tomorrow's stuff is just as long as today's. But tomorrow we're going to get into the story of the prophet Elisha, and a very colorful story about somebody who did not get accompaniment in the beginning of his travel, and the tremendous kerfuffle that ensued, shall we say. Let's just make sure as a takeaway that when somebody visits you, right, and so now you perform the mitzvah of hospitality, and then when they go on their way, you have to accompany them at least at the beginning of their trip and make sure they know where they're going and they have what they need to get there. All right, some quick questions and comments on Sotah 46. Bill, to clarify, one cannot legally put an animal consecrated for sacrifice to work, but it remains valid for sacrifice. However, once it's consecrated, you can't work it, but it remains permitted to make the offering, even though you made a transgression. But if it's worked in the past, you still can dedicate it to be an offering. Jonathan, there seems to be an allusion to the Ol Malchutecha, the yoke of God's service, right? The Ol, that's the yoke, Malchusecha, of his kingship, right? Your king, that is mentioned, or your kingship, right? The yoke of your kingship, meaning the yoke of the divine service, good, that is mentioned in the second paragraph of the Aleinu, that says that we take the yoke upon ourselves when we acknowledge God, generally a Torah life and his commandments. So maybe the heifer can't have taken on man's yoke in order to be ready to take on the holy yoke. So maybe it is another way to say we are responsible to take on God's work, justice, love of strangers, etc. Beautiful teaching. Jonathan, thank you. That's what I've got for us today. And with God's help, we'll be together again tomorrow night, Wednesday at the regular time, 6 p.m. Pacific, for Sotah 47, Wednesday 47, Thursday 48, and we should be making our siyum on this tractate. Its last page is page 49, God willing, on Friday. Have a great night.